My name is Margaret Hill. I am 84 years old, a grandmother of 6, and the memories I am about to share have lived in the darkest corners of my soul for over 70 years. I have learned that time does not erase pain, it only teaches you how to carry it. But there are some wounds that never heal, especially when they come from the people who are supposed to love you the most. I can still smell the damp wood of the old farmhouse that night, the faint scent of rain sneaking through the broken windows, mixing with the sharp tang of fear in my throat. My father stood in the middle of the kitchen, his face hard as stone, his hands gripping the leather belt that had been passed down from his father before him. He was breathing hard, like each breath was stoking the fire of rage inside him. I was trembling in my torn nightgown, my hands instinctively covering my swollen belly, the belly I hadn't asked for, the belly that carried the child of my own brother's abuse. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to beg him to listen, to tell him it wasn't my fault. But before I could get the words out, the crack of leather meeting skin split the air. The first strike knocked the air out of me, and I staggered back, my bare feet sliding on the kitchen floor. I heard my own gasp, sharp and desperate, but he didn't stop. He swung again and again, each strike carrying not just physical pain but the crushing weight of betrayal. My father, the man who had carried me on his shoulders when I was a child, the man who had taught me how to whistle, the man who used to tuck me in at night, now looked at me like I was filth. "You brought shame to this house," he shouted, his voice hoarse with fury. "Shame. You'll pay for what you've done." I didn't. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked under the weight of tears. "It wasn't me. I didn't they." "Shut your mouth," he roared, and the next blow landed across my shoulder. The pain radiated through me, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that no matter what I said, no matter how much I pleaded, he had already made up his mind. In his eyes, I was guilty. In his eyes, I was the sinner, the disgrace, the cause of his humiliation in town. I caught sight of the doorway. My mother stood there, her face pale, her hands gripping the frame so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared, her lips pressed together, her eyes empty. My stomach twisted, not from the child inside me, but from the knowledge that she would not save me either. The strike slowed, and for a moment, I thought it was over. I thought maybe he had gotten his anger out and would finally hear me. But then his voice dropped, low and cold, and that scared me more than the shouting. "You'll fix this," he said. "You'll get rid of it. And if you breathe a word to anyone, I'll make sure you regret being born." The room was spinning. I could feel my legs weakening, my breaths coming in short gasps. The kitchen light flickered overhead, casting shadows across his face that made him look like a stranger. It was in that moment, standing there with my father's belt marks burning across my skin and my mother's silence pressing into my chest, that something inside me cracked. Not just fear. Not just sorrow. Something deeper, a quiet, stubborn ember of survival that whispered, "Live, Margaret. No matter what they do, live." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But there was nowhere to go. Outside, the rain had turned into a full storm, the wind howling like it knew my pain. Inside, I was trapped between the man who had vowed to protect me and the brothers whose shadows still haunted my nights. The door to the back porch creaked open, and I saw one of them, David, standing there, leaning against the frame with a smirk that made my skin crawl. His eyes dropped to my belly, then back to my face, as if to remind me of what he had done and how powerless I was to stop it. That smirk was the last thing I saw before my father grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the back of the house. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming that something worse was coming. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it in my bones. And I was right. What happened next is the reason I still wake up some nights gasping for air. It's the moment that changed everything, the moment that turned my fear into a vow I would keep for the rest of my life. Because that night, my father did something no daughter should ever witness. And it wasn't the last time. Before that night, before the belt, before the shame that would cling to me for decades, I was just a girl who thought her family was safe ground. I was born in 1939 in a small farming town in Kansas, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and news traveled faster than the wind. Our farm sat on the edge of a dirt road, with fields of wheat that danced like gold every summer and a red barn that always needed a new coat of paint. I was the second of 5 children, 2 older brothers, David and Charles, and 2 younger sisters, Ruth and Emily. Back then, I thought being the middle child meant you were invisible, and maybe that's why I learned to keep my head down and my voice quiet. My father, John Hill, was a hard man, his love buried so deep beneath his pride that we rarely caught a glimpse of it. My mother, Lillian, was the type of woman who believed in silence as a virtue. She said women were meant to keep peace, even if it meant swallowing their own screams. We weren't rich, but we weren't starving either. The farm kept food on the table and gave us work to do from sunup to sundown. I remember waking before dawn, pulling on my patched overalls and running barefoot to the chicken coop before my brothers got there. They had a way of making every chore feel like punishment, even the ones I didn't mind doing. David was 19 when things began to shift, bigger, stronger, and with a mean streak that seemed to grow with each passing day. Charles was quieter, but he followed David like a shadow, always watching, always copying. At first, their cruelty was small, hiding my shoes, stealing the biscuits from my plate, mocking my voice if I dared to speak at the dinner table. But cruelty has a way of growing roots. It deepens. It changes shape. I was 14 the first time David grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. He said it was a joke, that I was being too sensitive, but the way his eyes lingered on me made my skin crawl. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself Charles was just going along with his older brother because he didn't know better. But the truth was, they both knew exactly what they were doing. It started with cornering me in the barn when no one was around, blocking the door with their bodies. They'd make comments about my body, laugh about how I blushed, and tell me I'd better not tell anyone if I knew what was good for me. I did tell once, whispering to my mother in the kitchen that David had been acting strange around me. She didn't look at me. She didn't even pause her chopping. She just said, "You must have misunderstood. Boys will be boys. Don't invite trouble, Margaret." That was the moment I learned that my safety wasn't guaranteed, not in my own home, not even with my own blood. By 15, I had perfected the art of slipping away unnoticed, memorizing every creaky floorboard in the house so I could move without a sound. But no matter how quiet I was, they always seemed to find me. And when they started coming into my room at night, I knew I was living on borrowed time. I tried to fight. I tried to scream. But the walls of that house were made for keeping secrets. My father never heard, or maybe he did and chose to turn over in bed. My mother never came. And my younger sisters were too small to understand what was happening in the dark. Months passed before I realized I was late. I thought maybe the stress was making my body strange, but deep down I already knew. My stomach was no longer flat. My dresses began to fit tighter. I stopped looking in the mirror because I couldn't bear the truth staring back at me. I told no one. Not until the morning my mother found me bent over in the yard, throwing up before breakfast. She grabbed my arm, hauled me inside, and whispered so harshly it felt like a slap. "Don't you dare tell me you've gone and ruined this family." I wanted to tell her everything, that her sons had taken from me what I could never get back, that I had tried to fight them, that I had prayed every night for it to stop. But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't asking for the truth. She was asking for silence. And silence was all I had left. It was a month later when my father found out. I don't know if my mother told him or if he overheard something in town, but the day he called me into the kitchen, I knew. The air was thick with a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. The moment I stepped inside, he asked me one question. "Who?" And when my lips stayed pressed shut, his rage exploded. I had imagined before that if he ever knew, he would protect me. That was the naive part of me, the part that still believed fathers were heroes. Instead, he reached for his belt. That was the beginning of the night I will never forget, the night you've already seen in part. But what you don't know yet is what he did after the last blow landed. And I promise you, that part will make your blood run cold. The belt dropped to the floor with a heavy thud, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing, ragged, uneven, desperate. My skin burned where the leather had struck, and my legs shook so badly I thought they might give out. I kept my arms wrapped around my belly, protecting the life inside me even though I didn't know how much longer I could. My father stood over me, his chest heaving, sweat glistening at his temples. His eyes weren't just angry, they were calculating. That was the part that made my stomach twist. He wasn't finished. "Get up," he ordered. My knees buckled as I tried to stand. The room tilted and swayed, but he grabbed my arm and yanked me upright. His grip was like iron, his fingers digging into my flesh until I winced. He didn't care. "We're going for a ride," he said, his voice low and flat.
A ride.
At that hour? In the pouring rain? My mind scrambled to piece it together, but my gut already knew it wasn't going to be anywhere good. My mother was still in the doorway. She hadn't moved. Her lips parted slightly as if she might speak, but no words came. Instead, she stepped aside when my father pulled me past her. That single step back felt like a lifetime of abandonment. The cold hit me first when we stepped outside, the kind of cold that bites straight into your bones. The rain was relentless, soaking through my nightgown in seconds, plastering the fabric against my skin. My father shoved me toward the old Ford truck park near the barn.
"Get in," he barked.
I hesitated. Something deep inside screamed don't. But before I could take a step back, his hand clamped around the back of my neck, forcing me toward the passenger door. My bare feet slipped in the mud, but he didn't loosen his grip until I was inside. He climbed in beside me, slammed the door, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the long dirt road that stretched away from the farm. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the steady drum of rain against the roof. Minutes passed before I realized we weren't heading toward town. We were going the opposite way, deeper into the countryside, where the road narrowed and the trees closed in around us. My heart pounded harder with each mile. Finally, he stopped. We were on the edge of the old quarry, a place I had been warned never to go. In the dark, the drop into the black water looked like the mouth of the earth itself, ready to swallow anything that came too close.
"Get out," he said again.
I shook my head before I even knew I was doing it. "Please, Daddy, please," I didn't. His hand shot out, gripping my jaw so hard it made my teeth ache. "You think you can ruin this family and stay under my roof? You think you can carry that?" His eyes flicked down to my stomach, "and still be my daughter?" Tears blurred my vision, but his face stayed sharp, etched into my mind like a scar. "You're going to fix this," he said. "Tonight." It hit me then, what he'd brought me here to do. He wanted me to climb down into the quarry, into that freezing, black water, and make sure the baby didn't survive. He wanted me to erase it, to erase the shame he thought I had brought on him. I couldn't move. My body felt like it had turned to stone. When I didn't get out, he reached for the door handle and flung it open himself. Rain and wind rushed in, and he shoved me toward the edge. My bare feet slipped on the wet gravel, sending sharp stones into my skin. The roar of the water below was deafening now. "Do it," he shouted over the storm. "Do it, or I'll do it for you." The cold wind whipped my hair into my face, and I tasted salt, not from the rain, but from my own tears. I looked down into the darkness and thought about how easy it would be to disappear. No more pain, no more fear, no more brothers sneaking into my room at night. But then, I thought about the small flutter I had felt just days before. The faint, almost imperceptible movement inside me. It wasn't my brother's anymore. It wasn't his. It was mine. And I wasn't going to let him take it. I turned to face him, my voice shaking but steady enough to say, "No." His eyes widened, maybe from shock, maybe from rage, but before he could react, the sound of another vehicle cut through the rain. Headlights appeared on the road behind us, growing brighter until they pulled up alongside the truck. It was the sheriff. He stepped out, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and looked between my father and me. His gaze lingered on my soaked nightgown, my bare feet, the way my father's hand was still gripping my arm. "Evening, John," he said slowly. "Something going on here?" My father's hand tightened, and I felt his body tense. He gave a thin smile and said, "Just a family matter, Sheriff. Nothing for you to worry about." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. And right then I had a choice, to stay silent like I always had, or to open my mouth and risk everything. I opened my mouth. But what I said made the sheriff's face change in a way I'll never forget, and it set into motion the events that would turn my entire world upside down. The rain seemed to pause in the air, suspended between the three of us, the sheriff, my father, and me. My lips trembled, but my voice came out louder than I expected. "They did this to me," I said, pointing to my swollen belly. "My brothers. And I gestured to my father. He brought me here to get rid of it." The sheriff's eyes flicked from me to my father, then back again. The silence stretched, broken only by the pounding rain on the gravel. My father let out a short, ugly laugh, as if trying to brush it off. "She's hysterical," he said, his tone suddenly calm, almost friendly. "You know how young girls can be, Sheriff. Telling stories." But the sheriff didn't smile. He stepped closer, his boots crunching in the wet stones. "Is that true, John? You trying to get rid of your own grandchild?" My father's jaw tightened. "Don't you go poking your nose into family business." "That's not family business," the sheriff said flatly. "That's a crime." For the first time, I saw something in my father's eyes that wasn't pure rage. It was calculation, a flicker of doubt that maybe, just maybe, he'd lost control of the situation. "Margaret," the sheriff said, turning his attention fully to me now. "Do you want to come with me?" My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I opened my mouth to say yes, but before I could, my father's hand clamped on my arm so tightly that pain shot up to my shoulder. "She's not going anywhere," he growled. The sheriff took a slow step forward. "Let her go." It happened fast, so fast I barely had time to breathe. My father shoved me toward the quarry edge, just enough to make the gravel slide under my feet. I stumbled, my arms flailing, the black water yawning below. But before I could fall, the sheriff lunged, grabbing my wrist and pulling me back. I collapsed against him, gasping, my nightgown plastered to my skin. He held me steady while glaring at my father. "That's enough, John," he said, his voice low but sharp. "If you don't back off, I'll haul you in tonight." For a moment, I thought my father might lunge at him. His fists were clenched, his shoulders squared. But then, without a word, he turned, stomped back to the truck, and slammed the door so hard it rattled in the frame. The engine roared to life, and he drove off into the storm, leaving me and the sheriff standing in the rain. The sheriff's grip on my shoulders was firm but not rough. "You're coming with me," he said. I wanted to believe that meant I was safe. But I knew my father and my brothers weren't the kind of men to let something like this go. We drove to the sheriff's office in near silence, the wipers swiping away sheets of rain. My body was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the enormity of what I'd just done. I'd broken the silence. I'd exposed them. Inside the small, dimly lit office, the sheriff handed me a blanket and poured me a cup of coffee. I was too shaken to drink. "We'll have to talk to the county investigator," he said. "And a doctor. You'll be safe here tonight." Safe. The word felt foreign in my mouth. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the old building made me think of my father's footsteps, my brother's whispers. I kept replaying the moment at the quarry, the way the sheriff's headlights had pierced the darkness just in time. By morning, word had spread. In a town as small as ours, secrets don't stay buried. People stared when they passed the sheriff's office, their curiosity mingled with judgment. I could almost hear their thoughts. Poor John Hill. His daughter's gone wild. But then, late that afternoon, the door swung open, and it wasn't the county investigator. It was my mother. Her hair was damp from the rain, her dress wrinkled, her eyes darting like she was afraid to be seen here. She stepped inside, glanced at the sheriff, then at me. "You need to come home," she said, her voice low. "We can fix this." I felt my stomach turn.
"No, Mama."
I'm not going back. She took a step closer, her hand outstretched like she could pull me up by sheer will. Margaret, you don't understand. Your father's furious. He's saying if you don't come home, he'll. She stopped. Her lips pressed together. He'll what? I demanded. Her eyes shifted to the sheriff, then back to me. He'll do something he can't take back. My blood ran cold. My father was many things, but one thing I knew for certain, he didn't make empty threats. And that was the moment I realized he might not just be coming for me. He might be coming for the baby. I didn't want to believe her. I wanted to think my mother was being dramatic, that she was just trying to guilt me back into the house like she'd done so many times before. But the look in her eyes told me different. It wasn't love that brought her here. It was fear. And not fear for me. Fear of my father. The sheriff shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. If that's what he's saying, Mrs. Hill, then she's not going anywhere near him. My mother's lips pinched together. You don't understand, Sheriff. If she stays here, it'll be worse for everyone. People are already talking. The church board. This isn't about the church. The sheriff cut her off. This is about her safety. And that baby's. My mother's gaze flicked to my stomach, her expression unreadable. That thing is what's causing all this trouble. Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my hand instinctively move to my belly, a protective gesture I didn't even think about anymore. It's not a thing, I said, my voice trembling but firm. It's mine. Her eyes narrowed, and I realized in that moment she didn't see me as her daughter anymore. She saw me as a problem to be solved. The sheriff escorted her out, his voice low but stern, telling her I was under his protection for now. But when the door closed and the office fell quiet again, he looked at me with something like concern mixed with uncertainty. Margaret, I need to be honest with you. If your father's serious, we don't have much time. Much time for what? I asked, though part of me already knew. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. I've known your father a long time. He's stubborn, but when he feels cornered, he gets mean. Dangerous. And if he's talking about doing something he can't take back, he might not wait for the law to catch up. My heart pounded. So what do? You hide, he said simply. Somewhere he won't think to look. It wasn't as easy as it sounded. In a town this small, there were no shelters, no secret safe houses. But the sheriff knew someone, a widow named Mrs. Carter, who lived on the far edge of the county. She kept to herself, didn't gossip, and owed the sheriff a favor from years back. That night, under the cover of darkness, he drove me there. The old farmhouse was tucked behind rows of maple trees, the porch light glowing like a quiet promise. Mrs. Carter greeted us with a firm handshake and a warm blanket. She didn't ask questions, just showed me to a small upstairs room and told me I could stay as long as I needed. For the first time in months, I slept without hearing footsteps outside my door. But peace is fragile. It never lasts long when someone's hunting you. 3 days later, Mrs. Carter came upstairs with a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. A man left this at the edge of the driveway, she said quietly. I opened it, my stomach nodding as I read the words in my father's jagged handwriting. You can run, but you can't hide. That baby won't see the light of day. The paper slipped from my fingers. My hands were cold, my breath short. I looked out the window, scanning the dark tree line for any sign of movement. The sheriff's warnings were no longer warnings. They were reality. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house made my heart race. I thought about leaving, going somewhere farther, somewhere he couldn't find me. But where? I had no money, no friends outside the county, and a body growing heavier with each passing week. The next morning, Mrs. Carter brought me breakfast and a decision I didn't want to make. Margaret, you can't stay here forever. If he's serious about finding you, he will. You need to think about other options. I knew what she meant. She didn't say the word, but I heard it in my head anyway. Adoption. Give the baby away. Disappear before my father could do what he was threatening. But every time I thought about it, my hand would drift to my stomach, and I'd feel that small, stubborn flutter inside. I couldn't give up the only thing in my life that was truly mine. So, I decided to do something reckless. I went to the sheriff the next day and told him I wanted to confront my father. Not to go back, not to give in, but to face him, to let him know that no matter what he did, I wasn't going to disappear. The sheriff looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Margaret, you don't poke a bear when it's already riled up. This isn't about poking the bear, I said. It's about showing him I'm not prey anymore. It took another 2 days of convincing, but finally, he agreed to accompany me, on one condition. We'd meet my father in a public place, where he couldn't try anything without witnesses. We arranged to meet at Miller's Diner on a Sunday afternoon, when it would be full of after-church regulars. The plan was simple: walk in, tell him face-to-face that I wasn't giving up my baby, then walk out with the sheriff. I thought I was ready. I thought the public setting would keep me safe. But when I walked into that diner and saw my father sitting in the corner booth with both of my brothers flanking him, their eyes locked on me like wolves sizing up a trapped rabbit, I knew this meeting wasn't going to end the way I thought. The bell above the diner door jingled as the sheriff and I stepped inside, the warm air thick with the smell of fried bacon and strong coffee. Miller's Diner was just as I remembered it. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a long counter lined with chrome stools. The after-church crowd was in full swing, chatter and clinking cutlery filling the space. But all that faded the moment I saw them. My father sat in the far corner booth, his elbows resting on the table, his hands folded as though we were about to discuss something civil. David sat to his right, his smirk already tugging at the corner of his mouth, and Charles sat to his left, expressionless, but with that same dark watchfulness he'd always had. The sheriff kept a steady hand on my back as we walked toward them. My pulse was pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in my ears. I could feel eyes on us from every booth we passed, small-town curiosity mixed with judgment. We stopped at the table. My father's gaze swept over me slowly, lingering on my stomach before meeting my eyes. "You look tired," he said, his tone almost casual. "Running doesn't suit you." "I'm not running," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "I'm protecting my baby." David let out a low chuckle, leaning back in the booth. "Baby, huh? You mean the thing you're carrying that's going to ruin this family?" My fingers curled into fists at my sides. "The only thing ruining this family is sitting right here in this booth." A few heads turned in our direction. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. That was always his most dangerous form. Quiet, controlled, masking the rage beneath. "You've been listening to people who don't know their place," he said. "We can settle this at home. You come back and we'll take care of it." Take care of it made my skin crawl. We both knew what that meant. The sheriff cleared his throat. "John, she's made her choice. This meeting is to let you know she's not coming back, and she's keeping the baby. That's it." David leaned forward, his smirk gone now. "And what? You think you can play mother after what we—" He stopped, glancing at my father, who shot him a warning look. That half-sentence hung in the air like poison. My stomach turned, but I kept my eyes locked on my father. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said. "Not you, not them. You don't get to decide what happens to me or my child." Something flickered in his eyes, rage, yes, but also a kind of disbelief, like he wasn't used to hearing me speak without trembling. Then, in a move I didn't see coming, he slid a small envelope across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Proof," he said simply. I glanced at the sheriff, then slowly opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white, clearly taken from a distance. My blood went cold as I realized they were of me, at Mrs. Carter's house. Shots of me hanging laundry, sitting on the porch, walking in the yard. "He knows where you've been," the sheriff murmured. My father's voice was low, but laced with venom. "You think hiding will save you? I can reach you anywhere. That baby won't leave this county." The photographs shook in my hands, my mind racing. If he'd found me once, he could find me again. And if he was willing to stalk me, there was no telling what his next step would be. The sheriff stepped between us, his hand resting near his holster. "This conversation's over." But my father wasn't finished. "Margaret, you come home now, and maybe I'll let you keep it." "Let me?" My voice rose despite the lump in my throat. You don't own me, and you'll never touch my child. For the first time, my father's composure cracked. His hand slammed down on the table so hard the silverware rattled. Conversations in the diner fell silent. You think you're strong because you've got him. He jabbed a finger toward the sheriff. Standing here? Men like him don't stay forever. And when he's gone, you'll be mine again. The sheriff's voice was calm but firm. We're leaving. As we turned toward the door, I heard David mutter something under his breath, something that stopped me cold. Better watch that baby at night. I froze mid-step. The sheriff must have seen the look on my face because he guided me quickly out the door, his pace brisk. Outside, the cool air hit me like a slap. He's escalating, the sheriff said. This isn't just threats anymore. He's making it clear he's willing to act. I swallowed hard, the photographs still clutched in my hand. Then I have to act first. And in that moment I knew, if I wanted to protect this child, I couldn't just hide. I had to disappear completely. Not just from my father, from everyone. But disappearing meant doing something I'd sworn I would never do. Something that would cut me off from everything I'd ever known. That night, I sat on the narrow bed in Mrs. Carter's upstairs room, staring at the grainy photographs my father had slipped to me at the diner. They were creased from my grip, but the faces in the background, strangers walking by, the outline of Mrs. Carter's porch, burned into my mind. He'd been close enough to watch me, close enough to know exactly where I was. The sheriff had offered to put me under protective watch, but I knew what that meant in a small town like ours. It meant everyone would know. And the more people who knew, the easier it would be for word to leak back to my father. No, this was bigger than hiding now. If I wanted to keep my child alive, I couldn't just stay out of sight. I had to vanish so completely that my father wouldn't have a trail to follow. But vanishing isn't something you can do on hope alone. You need planning. You need help. And you need to be willing to leave everything behind. I thought about the things I would lose, my little sisters, who still looked at me with a kind of innocent trust I'd never see again. The farm fields I'd run through as a child. The town where I knew every corner. Then I thought about my father's voice at the quarry. Do it, or I'll do it for you. The choice was clear. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's office before the sun was up. He looked at me like he already knew what I was about to say. You're not coming back, are you? He asked. Not here. Not anywhere he can find me. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. You understand what that means, Margaret. You disappear, you're on your own. No visits, no letters, no letting anyone know where you are, not even me. Because if I know, he'll try to get it out of me. I understand. There was a long silence before he nodded.
All right.
I know a man who owes me a favor. He runs freight deliveries between here and the state line. Sometimes he doesn't ask too many questions about what's in the back of his truck. And that was how, 3 nights later, I found myself crouched in the dark back of a covered freight truck, my knees pulled up to my chest, the baby kicking softly as if sensing the change in our fate. Mrs. Carter had given me a small suitcase with clothes and food, but everything else I'd left behind. I didn't even take the few photographs I owned. I couldn't risk anything that might tie me to my past. The ride was long, bumpy, and silent except for the hum of the engine. I didn't know where exactly we were going, only that it was across the state line, far enough to make it harder for my father to pull me back. Hours later, the truck slowed, then stopped. The driver opened the back and gestured for me to climb out. I stepped into the cool night air and found myself standing on the edge of a small town I'd never seen before. The streets were quiet, the storefronts dark. This is as far as I go, the driver said. You're on your own from here. I thanked him and started walking, my suitcase heavy in my hand. I didn't know where I'd sleep that night, but the feeling of putting miles between me and my father was enough to keep my legs moving. Over the next few days, I found odd jobs, washing dishes in a diner, sweeping floors at a feed store. I kept my head down, used only my first name, and never stayed in one place for too long. Each time I felt eyes lingering too long, each time a stranger asked me where I was from, I moved again. Months passed. My belly grew heavier, my steps slower. I was starting to believe I might actually make it to the day my child was born without my father finding me. But then one afternoon, as I was leaving the diner after a long shift, I saw it. A truck parked across the street. An old Ford. My father's old Ford. The driver's side window was rolled down, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I knew that posture. I knew the shape of those shoulders.
He had found me.
I froze, my suitcase still in hand, my mind racing. I couldn't run back to my rented room. He'd follow me. I couldn't stay in the open. And then, as if fate had been waiting for this moment, I heard a voice behind me. "You all right, miss?" I turned to see a woman about my age, maybe a few years older, standing in the doorway of the shop next to the diner. She had kind eyes and a quickness in her voice, like she already knew I was in trouble. Without thinking, I stepped toward her. "Please," I whispered. "Don't let him see me." She glanced over my shoulder, saw the truck, and without another word, pulled me inside, locking the door behind us. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. "My father," I said. "And if he finds me, it won't end well." She studied me for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Then I guess we'll make sure he doesn't." I didn't know it then, but meeting that woman was the turning point. Because she wasn't just offering me shelter, she was about to offer me a way to disappear for good. And what she told me next was a plan so risky it could either save my life or destroy it completely. The shop smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with bolts of cloth, spools of thread, and jars of buttons. The woman guided me past the counter, deeper into the back room, her footsteps quick and decisive. She didn't look nervous. She looked like someone who had already decided to help. "My name's Helen," she said quietly, pulling a chair out for me. "You can sit, but we don't have much time." I eased into the seat, my swollen belly making the motion slow. My hands were still trembling, and my mind kept flashing to the old Ford parked outside. Was he still there? Was he watching? Helen must have read my thoughts. "He's not coming in here," she said firmly. "But he'll wait. Men like that always wait." I swallowed hard.
You don't understand.
"If he finds me, he'll—" "I do understand," she cut in, her voice steady. "I've seen his kind before. And I've helped women get away from them." That made me sit up straighter. "You've helped how?" Helen glanced toward the window, then lowered her voice. "I have friends who work the trains. Freight, mostly. They don't ask questions if someone's riding along, as long as they know it's for the right reason. The train yard's 3 miles from here. There's one leaving before dawn tomorrow, headed clear across the state, then down south. If you're on it, you'll be a ghost by the time the sun's up." My heart thudded in my chest. The idea of climbing into a freight train like some outlaw was terrifying. But the thought of my father finding me, finding my baby, was worse. "Once you're gone," Helen continued, "you need a new name, new story. No contact with anyone from your old life. If you slip, even once, he'll find you again." I thought about my sisters, about never seeing them again, never hearing their voices, or knowing if they grew up safe. The ache in my chest was almost too much to bear. Helen leaned forward, her eyes locking on mine. "You want your baby safe, right? This is how you do it." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. That night, Helen let me sleep in the small storage room above her shop. I lay awake for hours, listening to the creak of the building and the distant rumble of cars outside. Every now and then, I thought I heard the low growl of a truck engine idling in the distance, and my stomach twisted. Just before dawn, Helen shook me awake. "Time to go." We moved quickly. She handed me an old coat and a worn hat that shadowed my face, and we slipped out the back door into the cold morning air. The streets were empty, save for the flickering street lamps. The walk to the train yard felt longer than it was. Every sound, every crunch of gravel underfoot, every distant bark of a dog, made me glance over my shoulder. I half expected to see the beam of my father's headlights rounding the corner. When we reached the yard, Helen led me to a line of freight cars where a man in a heavy jacket stood smoking. He didn't say much, just looked me over once, then nodded at Helen. "This is her," she said simply. The man flicked his cigarette away and pulled open the side door of an empty boxcar. Climb in. Stay low. When we stop in Memphis, you get out. Don't talk to anyone till you're clear. I climbed up, the metal cold under my palms. Inside, the car smelled of old wood and dust. Helen handed me a small satchel, bread, water, and a folded envelope. Don't open that till you're far away, she said. I wanted to thank her, to tell her she'd just saved not only my life but my baby's. But my throat was too tight. Instead, I just held her hand for a moment. She squeezed it once. Live, Margaret. And never look back. The door slid shut, plunging me into darkness. Moments later, the train lurched forward. I sat on the floor, my knees drawn up, my hand over my belly as the rhythm of the tracks carried me farther from the only life I'd ever known. Hours passed. I don't know how long I drifted in and out of sleep, but when I woke to the sound of the train slowing, my heart leapt. Memphis. A new place. A chance to start over. But just as the brakes screeched and the train began to crawl into the station, I heard it. A voice. Low, familiar and chilling. You didn't think you could hide from me forever, did you? I froze, my blood turning to ice. He was here. The sound of his voice in that dark, swaying freight car was like ice water down my spine. My fingers dug into the wooden floor as I turned my head toward the shadows, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see him yet, just the faint outline of a man crouched near the opposite corner. The dim light leaking through the slats caught the glint of something in his hand. For a terrifying second, I thought it was a weapon. Daddy, my voice cracked, but it wasn't from affection. It was the disbelief of seeing the nightmare I'd been running from materialize in front of me. How did you? He moved closer, each step deliberate, the sway of the train making him seem even more like a predator. Did you really think a boxcar and a few miles would keep me away? You forget I know people, and people talk. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. You can't be here, I said, my voice shaking. You can't. Can't what? He interrupted, his tone low but dangerous. Can't stop me? Can't keep that thing? His gaze dropped to my belly, and I instinctively wrapped my arms around it. The train jolted over a junction, and the movement made him grab the wall for balance. That split second was my only opening. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward the door. My fingers brushed the cold metal handle, but I knew if I tried to open it while the train was moving, I could fall to my death. He must have seen the panic in my eyes, because he smiled, a slow, terrible smile. You jump now, you die. And if you don't, you come home with me. His words were poison in the air. I could feel the walls of the car closing in. My mind raced, searching for a way out that didn't end in disaster. Then I remembered Helen's envelope. Keeping my eyes on him, I reached into the satchel and pulled it out. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a folded wad of cash, more than I'd ever held in my life, and a small slip of paper with a name and address. He took a step closer. What's that? None of your business, I said, forcing steel into my voice even though fear was squeezing my lungs. The train began to slow as it approached the Memphis yard. I could hear the brakes screeching, the shift in the rhythm of the tracks. My father glanced toward the slats in the door, and I knew his mind was working as fast as mine. In that moment, something in me snapped, not in fear this time, but in defiance. I wasn't going to let him win. Not again. As the train slowed to a crawl, I darted forward, shoving past him with all the force I could muster. He stumbled back, catching himself on the wall, and I yanked the door's latch. Cold air rushed in, whipping my hair into my face. The ground outside blurred past, slower now, but still dangerous. I turned to see him coming toward me, his eyes blazing. You jump. You kill us both, he shouted. No, I said, my voice steady for the first time since I'd heard his voice. I jumped, and I save us. Before he could reach me, I gripped the satchel tight against my chest, turned my body, and leapt. The impact knocked the air out of me. Gravel tore at my hands and knees, and the world spun as I rolled down the embankment. I clutched my belly, praying the baby was still safe. When I finally came to a stop, my ears rang from the pounding of my heartbeat. I looked up just in time to see my father leaning out of the slowing boxcar, his face twisted in rage as the train carried him away. I lay there, gasping, until the rumble faded. Then I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel above me. I froze. A man's voice called down, "Miss? You all right?" I looked up and saw a tall figure in a railroad uniform. He was holding out his hand. I need to get to this address," I said, handing him the paper from Helen's envelope. He read it, nodded once, and said, "I know the place. Come on. Let's get you there before the wrong person finds you." I didn't know it yet, but that address wasn't just a safe house. It was the place where everything in my life was about to change, forever. The railroad worker's hand was warm and steady as he helped me to my feet. My knees stung from the gravel, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief of knowing my father wasn't in sight anymore. I clutched Helen's satchel tightly against me, my other arm wrapped protectively around my belly. We walked along the edge of the tracks until we reached a small service road. A truck was parked there, its headlights off. The man opened the passenger door for me and climbed in on the driver's side. "Name's Walt," he said as he started the engine. "Helen's a good woman. I owe her. So, if she sent you to this address, I'm gonna get you there." The drive was quiet except for the hum of the engine. My body ached from the jump, but my mind was sharp with questions. Who lived at this address? Why had Helen been so certain it was where I needed to go? After about 40 minutes, we pulled onto a gravel driveway lined with tall pine trees. At the end sat a modest white house with a wraparound porch. A light was on in the kitchen window, casting a warm glow into the night. Walt cut the engine. "You go on in. She's expecting you." "She?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He nodded. "You'll see." I climbed out slowly, my legs still unsteady. The air smelled faintly of pine, and something sweet, maybe bread baking. I walked up the steps and knocked softly on the door. It opened almost immediately. A woman in her late 50s stood there, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, her face lined but kind. She looked me over once, her eyes resting on my belly, and then she stepped aside. "Come in, Margaret," she said. My breath caught. "You know my name?" She smiled faintly. "Helen told me everything. I'm Ruth, and I've been where you are." Something in her voice, steady, calm, certain, made my knees nearly give out. I stepped inside, and the warmth of the house wrapped around me like a blanket. She led me to the kitchen, where a pot of tea steamed on the table. "You're safe here," she said. "Truly safe. I've got a basement with a lock, a barn out back where no one can see in, and a few friends in law enforcement who know how to keep their mouths shut." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders ease just a little. "My father, he's not going to stop." Her eyes softened, but there was steel beneath them. "Then we make sure he can't find you. And if he does, we make sure he doesn't get what he's after." Over the next few weeks, Ruth became my anchor. She helped me find clothes that didn't draw attention, taught me which roads to avoid, and introduced me to people she trusted, people who could keep a secret. She never asked me to relive what had happened, but she listened when I needed to talk. And then, one cold morning in late March, I went into labor. It was long and it was hard, but Ruth was there every second. When it was over, she placed my baby in my arms, a tiny, perfect girl with a full head of dark hair. I named her Grace. Holding her, I knew I had made the right choice. Every mile I'd traveled, every night I'd spent looking over my shoulder, it had all been worth it. But even then, I knew I couldn't stay forever. The more people who knew where I was, the greater the risk. When Grace was 2 months old, Ruth arranged for me to move again, this time farther away, under a new name, with papers that said I'd been born somewhere else entirely. That was the last time my father ever saw me. Or her. Years passed. Grace grew up not knowing the shadow we'd escaped, only the love I could give her. And though I never saw my father or brothers again, the fear they'd planted in me never completely left. Now, at 84 years old, I tell this story not because I want pity, but because I want anyone listening to know that you can survive the unthinkable. You can be hunted, cornered, beaten down, and still find a way to protect what matters most. And if you're in a place where someone wants to take your voice, your safety, or your child, don't wait for them to change.
Run.
Even if you have to jump from a moving train. I lived. Grace lived. And that's the only victory I ever needed. To all the women who've been silenced, your story matters.
Tell it.
If this story touched your heart, showed you the strength of quiet power, and reminded you to never give up, like, comment, and subscribe. Your story matters too.